Well, here we are. It is, what's today? Today is June 5th. And I want to talk a little bit about something that's been on my mind, and I hope those of you that are interested in antiques and art will appreciate what I'm going to say, and maybe you agree with me, maybe you don't agree with me. But I would like to get into a little bit about the importance of antiques and art and what it means to culture in the world. And the reason it sounds like a very broad topic, the reason I'm bringing it up is that there is a noticeable lack of interest by a whole a generation and a half, 2 generations of people right now in America that don't seem to have any real interest in art and antiques and the history behind them. And it's very sad. It's a very sad thing because we can learn a great deal from the objects that have been left by previous generations that were created. And for me, my own background, as you know, I was raised in New England. We were immersed in history around here. I was raised in a town with a lot of history. It was going back to the earliest settlements in America. It was a town called Marblehead, and I went to school in a public school in the town that really, really, really talked about the history of the town, the history of Massachusetts, American history, the history of England, the history of the colonies, all that business. All of that was taught to us from a very young age. We had classes on history starting in the first grade. And it went right into high school, and I went to school in Maine later on. There was more of it, and they were my favorite topics. History, world history, American history, as well as political science, because the two are absolutely intertwined. If you never took a political science class and you're interested in history, you really missed out. Go take one, because history is tied directly to political science. Of course, the two are inextricable in many, many ways, and that's simply the reality of it. And it all comes back to me through antiques and art, because when I look at an antique, whether it's a piece of furniture, Chinese porcelain, whatever the object is, I have them around my house. They're reminders. They're things that I can look at every day and say, oh, well, that painting was from this period, and this is what was going on then. And I try very hard to put myself in the mindset of that period that the picture came from. And I think today there's a sort of a reflex desire to condemn all of that stuff by a lot of people in America today, the whole generations of young people that just dismiss everything from the past as though it was just so horrible they can't even talk about it and so forth. And it's a very dangerous thing to do. And we need to know what antiques and art can teach us about our own culture and what they represent. And it's highly important that you know where they came from. And by understanding the political science side of it, we know about democracy, we know about communism, socialism, monarchies, dictatorships, some that work, some that don't work. We've all seen throughout history that the more controlling and more repressive a government is, it inevitably collapses at some point, but there is a great repression of creativity in the arts. People stop feeling quite so good about themselves. They're not creating beautiful things as much as they used to, and so forth. And we saw this in England under Cromwell. We saw it in the Middle East when Islam was expanding, and it was very, very violent. There wasn't a lot of great art being built, and then they went through sort of an Enlightenment period. We don't think of it that much anymore, but because it was a long time ago, they had sort of this enlightened period where they were very involved with encouraging the arts and beauty and music and so forth. We saw the same in China. We've seen the same in India. All these cultures, when they're thriving, they do things that sort of fill the soul, I guess, with beauty and wonderful things. And of course, the more controlling a country becomes, the weaker it becomes, and eventually it collapsed. And this is the simple matter of it. And objects from the past can really only be understood by understanding them in their historical context. I'm going to keep saying that because a lot of people don't understand that. They don't understand why an object looks like the way it looks. They don't understand the period that it came from. For example, when American furniture rapidly changed over from the heavy Chippendale and that style of furniture, that English furniture prior to the Revolution, went to federal furniture. Well, what happened? Well, we had a revolution. And the philosophical beliefs of the country changed very much from that of a monarchy in England, more to the democracy put forward by the Greeks, and so forth. And that's so they began adopting more and more material depictions, objects, architecture from the Greeks, and that's why you have Greek revival furniture in America. You had all this very elegant, highly different federal period furniture. We saw the same. We've seen the same in China as it went from the Song to the Yuan dynasty. Well, what happened there? Why did they go from making little tiny tea bowls and suddenly making giant blue and white chargers? Well, the Mongols were traders, and they had brought in cobalt from the Middle East through Muslim traders, and they began applying it to porcelain. It was hugely successful. They went to making giant pieces of porcelain for to export to share among people within the empire. They went to Turkey and India and other places, because the Genghis Khan, the Khans were had different dining styles. They ate on the ground. They ate in tents. They ate massive feasts. It was a very, very different culture, and those are important things to know when you're looking at objects. Why it changed, when it changed, how it changed, what were they doing, and these things all are around today in museums and in private collections as reminders of our past, good and bad. There were bad things that happened too in the past, just like there are bad things today that are happening. But understanding them in the context of when and where and how they were created, and being in that mindset is essential. It was the norm of the day, as they say, the norm of the day. It's what they viewed as being very, very acceptable. And there were lots of things that were acceptable then that we condemn today, slavery being one of the biggest. But you have the slavery argument's been completely tipped on its ear. And historically, the average American doesn't know anything about the real history of slavery, and it's because I blame the historians and the teachers in the schools for sort of shading over that. That history has been completely obliterated on a global basis. But people who collect antiques know about it. People that are interested in Middle Eastern art and Far Eastern art know all about it. And they sit and they listen to the people talking today, and they think that they're absolutely crazy. And this is just one little aspect of it. We could talk about all kinds of trade that was going on in the world. We could talk about exploration into South America and how that happened. Exploration into the South Pacific, how that happened. All of those areas produced objects of material culture. All of them were involved with trade. This was very, very typical throughout the world. And what we learn is that the more advanced a society becomes, the more developed their art, literature, and objects become, the more beautiful they become. Cultures that don't evolve very much remain sort of stuck. They don't go very far. And when you look at around the world and view the material cultures, the material objects that were created by various societies in different periods of time, you can learn an enormous amount about their own history and perhaps the state of the world at that time, what was going on. And some societies have traveled, we look back at history, some societies have traveled upward in a nearly a nonstop straight line, century after century, while others appear to have done very well for a time, and then suddenly they go by the wayside for a while, and then maybe they come back, maybe they never come back. There are lots of cultures in the world that are still living as though it's 3,000 years ago. That is absolutely true. There are some very backward cultures in the world, and there are some highly advanced cultures in the world. And sometimes it's due to internal social struggles that upset their progression. Other times it's external forces caused by a more powerful culture that came in. Occasionally natural disasters occur. And sometimes it's just a philosophical view of that culture. And we can see it in many, many, many examples. And this is something that people sort of don't want to talk about today, that one culture advanced more than another throughout history. And dare I say it, some cultures are better off because of it. They're more advanced, they're more sophisticated than other places in the world. This is something that people don't like to discuss anymore, and I don't know why. Sometimes these shifts are rapid, sometimes they're very slow. The designing of objects within a culture are most often a response to some sort of change in their norm and what they're doing, and recognizing these shifts is highly important if you're going to develop a real understanding of what's going on in the world. Objects from out of the past are much more than just home decoration or utensils or tools or clothing that you once wore, or weapons that were once used, or volumes of books that were long ago written. There's a lot to be learned in them to guide us today to where we are, because every generation that comes along is building on the previous history. And if you don't know the previous history, how are you going to build on it? How are you going to build on science if you don't know a bit about the history of science up to today? Because those are your foundations. And we have foundations of civilization, we have foundations of military, we have foundations of all kinds of things around the world that have been built up over century after century. And all of them are manifested in objects today. All right, they are the embodiment of man's own history and have been built upon, as I said, by generation after generation since man first walked upright. There are evidence, there are cave drawings that go back, hundreds, thousands of years they've found, and all of that is part of our history. And we need to learn about those. They learn to interpret the writing that was left behind if they can, and then consider what happens when the appreciation for history and cultural objects stops. And this seems to be sort of a point where we are today. It really, really does. I find it sad and rather shocking. All right. And thinking about rational humans as we are, we need to examine and wonder why it has stopped and consider what happens when history becomes rewritten or reinterpreted through the lens of away from historical events, looking through it through this strange view of they're just sort of leaving out parts, a little omission here and there, skipping parts of history, or not even discussing them at all, and then passing that down to a lot of young people and middle-aged people today that are sort of going along in sort of a blissful ignorance of what really, really happened, and forgetting or ignoring and not appreciating actual history as it was written. The real stuff, the stuff that we know happened in man's evolution over time, is very dangerous, and it leaves the door wide open for all kinds of mischief, and often ending in disaster. For those contemporaneously trying to prosper in the world. How are you going to prosper in the world if you don't know what happened before and you're unaware of things that could happen again, and so forth? And historical ignorance takes many forms. This is something that I notice a lot when I look at things. I see when you see history repeating itself: social and cultural ignorance, political ignorance, economic ignorance, medical ignorance, science, in general, and many more. There's lots of areas, and a large part of it is because they don't teach it anymore. From what I can see. Much of it is not taught anymore. And the truth is, most of the conflicts around the world are caused by one way or another by getting enough people who are historically ignorant enough to go along with and support one bad idea dreamed up by one person or a group of people wanting something that they have no right to. This is how wars get started. And it's really not all that complicated. And the other truth is that most of man's greatest achievements have been accomplished in an environment that encourages advancement, provides economic support, and understands what happened before, so they can build on the past by knowing their history and seeing what that provides as a starting point for everything. All right. And this is something that I would really be thrilled if I saw history classes actually being taught in history again in schools. And right now it doesn't. And we see lots and lots of cases today when you hear people talking about historical events, whether it's about the Middle East or about Europe or something else, there's always a twist in there for some contemporary political reason that they'll either add something that wasn't ever there, or they'll take out something that was there to validate their point. And this inaccuracy in understanding history is a big problem today, and we're seeing lots of it. The written word and material culture are essential elements to this unending progress, because without them, without understanding all of this, humans will eventually self-destruct and stagnate on themselves. That's really where you're at. The history of science, the war, religions, trade, slavery, as I said, was a giant business. It was a very accepted business. The formation and collapse of civilizations, we've seen them throughout the world, in every continent that it's happened. It's all part of it, and it should be passed down from generation to generation accurately and intact, and by adding to it, and by adding to the history books new things as we learn them, not opinions, but new things, new facts, as archaeologists do their things. New things turn up all the time, and this is the result. This all results in a more material culture that you can learn about, you can collect, and you can make part of your life. In the history of undeveloped cultures, people who have barely advanced in thousands of years, while others have gone to the moon and beyond. Understanding these realities tells us some cultures are more advanced than others, but the other cultures that haven't advanced much, they have things to tell us too. They have objects, tribal art, fascinating area, their textile art and so forth. But for some reason, they just couldn't get any further. They couldn't go any more. They couldn't get. They didn't invent the. They never had the wheel. Lots of civilizations never had the wheel. The Native Americans didn't have a. They had not yet invented the wheel when the first explorers came here. It never occurred to them. They used to drag everything. Why is that? Why? What happened? And some cultures, frankly, are just inferior to others as far as their development goes. I'm not saying they're less worthy as human beings. I'm saying their culture is inferior because it didn't allow them to do what other people with the same brains, the same everything. There's human beings just like we are. But what happened? Why is it societally that they didn't progress and other groups did progress? All right, this is the thing, and today I think there's this very strange lack of curiosity, and dare I say it, no reverence for history and art and so forth, and that's too bad. And it's a condition that leaves the door open to be manipulated, even against people's own best interests. If they don't know history, they can be talked into all kinds of crazy things. Always remember that once an idea, with some groups around the world throughout history, once an idea becomes a belief, because they haven't learned history, even if it's proven to be untrue and they're shown that it's untrue, the believer is almost impossibly stuck in it no matter what forever, despite the evidence against it, even when given historic evidence showing that this is inaccurate. And this is, again, why it should be taught. People should learn history, learn about the world, learn about objects, learn about what went before them before they get stuck in these mind traps. And that's really what they are. And lots of the things that you hear that have been completely debunked, we see it all the time in the news, and people still hang on to it. I mean, this is how superstitions get started. People still believe that black cats are bad luck. They still believe that you throw salt over your shoulder if you spill some, so bad luck won't happen to you. Walking under ladders, ghosts, reincarnation, horoscopes, tarot cards, all of that. There are still people believe in all that stuff, even though obviously none of it is. It's all just your imagination, and it's delusional thinking. But people in the past believed it. And to this day, some people pass it along as though they believe it too. There are people that every day read their horoscopes because they think that where a certain planet is actually affects their life. And they'll give you a million arguments why. It's like talking to flat earthers. It just doesn't make any sense. But to them it does because they believe it. Belief systems are very, very dangerous if that belief system comes from false information, and I guess is what I'm saying. And in the modern day, this sort of willful ignorance of our past, we have inevitably ended up with parts of history we no longer discuss. It might be inconvenient. It might make somebody feel badly. And worse yet, it might even make them angry. All right. So whole areas of history just get skipped over today. Examples of this are everywhere. Frankly, it makes me laugh a bit, but it also makes me kind of sad knowing that a lot of people hold some of these ideas as beliefs and think they are true, despite obvious evidence to the contrary. And usually results, if you bring up things to people that are historically that they've said that are just flat out wrong, that 80% of the people know, but you have 10% that don't. And you say, well, actually, the date for this was that, and this is why, and who wrote about it, and all that. And they'll go, yeah, well. And anytime anybody says, yeah, well, in response to being told some new information, or what about, you're talking with an idiot. It's pretty much, that's what you're doing. People can bring up other points afterwards, but to not accept a piece of very accurate information and change the subject with what about or yeah, well, you're talking to a fool. All right. And if next time you hear it, just end the conversation right there, unless it's somebody you really have to talk to, because it's not going to go anywhere because you're talking to somebody in a mind trap. They're stuck in a belief, and beliefs can be true and they can be false, but they both have the same amount of power. It's sort of like religion to people. Once a religion becomes a belief to someone, changing that religion or altering it or trying to get them to think differently of it is terrifying to them. Because it's disorienting, and again, it's because they don't know history, and and once this happens, it's all sort of a short hop to garnering support for any number of misguided causes and crazy ideas that by getting folks, the idea is to get folks feeling very unsatisfied with their lives. You give them ideas that aren't true, and this is how people can be led astray. It's a very manipulative thing, and before you know it, folks put themselves into groupthink boxes, and we've seen enough of groupthink boxes, I think, in the last 10 years to last us 100 at this point, all the while demanding attention for their own enablement, seeking causes they can benefit from by, strange self-imposed sort of weird crash into some sort of victimhood and so forth. And all of these things come about because they don't know anything about history. It literally is. All of the stuff that we see now with lots of these protests in the street about one cause or another, or one group or another, they're really, you just watching a lot of people just sitting around denying reality because they don't know history about anything. They don't know anything about science. They don't know anything about anything. They know what they've learned in the short term. And there are lots and lots and lots of glaring examples of the craziness of belief systems today. I think the biggest one, though, I have to say, and I'm not trying to start a fight, and I don't want to hear a lot of angry comments, but it's this really nutty, I've seen it a couple of times. You have these groups that are supporting Hamas, which absolutely astounds me. It's the same as supporting ISIS. And but they're LGBTQ groups in support of Hamas. And of course, the amusing part of it to anybody that knows anything about these groups would know that if an LGBT group went to Gaza and protested, even in support of Hamas, they'd be executed on the spot because they're just considered to be too vile and too disgusting to even look upon. Homosexuality in Iran, they're still hanging people, but you have a group of people in America that are so desperate to want to complain and protest about something. They go from things like the BLM protests over to the Hamas protests. It's the same people. They've actually photographed some of them. It's rather hilarious. But these are not serious people. These are people that really aren't very well educated. And there's a total mental disconnect because they don't know the history of the region. They don't know the history of Hamas. They don't know the history of Israel. They don't know the history of Palestine. They couldn't tell you where the river to the sea was if you threw it at them. All right. But that is all part of a lack of education of understanding history. And I'm not going to just pick on that. I could go to any number of countries where you have similar sorts of imbecilic arguments taking place and being taken seriously on top of it until they just become so obviously absurd, they just fade out of the news cycle. But in the meantime, the damage has been done. And anybody that knows history, honestly knows history, never falls for any of this. It's a great insurance policy, and it's sort of fun to sit in public places and restaurants and things and quietly sitting there reading the newspaper and drinking a cup of coffee and listening to a babbling conversation 2 tables over about somebody discussing all these such urgent things that people think that they are today, when it's obvious none of them know anything about anything. And that's the absolutely crazy part of it. And I find it totally hilarious. And I don't know where it's all going to end up, but I will tell you that part of it is getting back to understanding history, teaching history, reading history, appreciating the beauty and the wonder of the cultures that produce great objects, whether they're in Europe or they're in South America or in Australia, the Aboriginal tribes or the Chinese potters or the Turkoman rug weavers. They all contributed something to the history of the world. They've all made contributions, and all the contributions matter because they keeps everything in context to what was going on at every period. And I just hope that it becomes it begins to get taken a bit more seriously, I guess, in this country. And I would really love to see people show more interest in the material culture of their past, not for the snob appeal, and not for what they think it'll give them socially in today by saying they own an expensive piece of furniture or a beautiful this or that, which is always fun to own. But the main issue is that by buying objects and becoming interested in different parts of culture, you learn about the culture, you learn about the history, and it's an enriching process where you begin to really understand what goes on in the world. And you can understand it, and you can spot flaws in the world today, and you can spot mistakes that were made in the past. And lots of mistakes were made in the past, and lots of mistakes are being made now, and lots of mistakes will be made by mankind long after everybody seeing this video is dead. It will keep happening because that's what human beings do. They climb up, they climb up, they climb up. They're on a never-ending progress, hopefully, to making the world a bit better. In the world right now, despite all the noise and all the commotion and all the complaining by everybody on every side of the aisle, the world right now is the best it's ever been in the history of humanity. We have the best medicine of mankind. There are few people in poverty ever in history. More people are living well in the world than ever in history before. There are more opportunities for everybody, regardless of where you live. You can take MIT classes now from Central Africa in a little village for free. All right. I mean, that kind of stuff is actually going on. You can do all this amazing stuff. The world is so much better now than it's ever been. And it breaks my heart to see people complaining that are the very, very privileged people going to these amazing Ivy League schools and having the chance to get these fantastic educations, and they don't appreciate one bit of it. And all they do is complain and basically bitch about their very unfortunate lives. They have the best life. As right now, we have the best lives that human beings have ever had on this planet. And it's very important that people go back and study the history of mankind up to today, learn it, because how we got here was no mistake. We got here through progression and getting better and better and better little by little. And this is why I'm interested in art, in artifacts from the past. That's all I have to say on it. I hope I didn't go too much on it. If you got a comment to make, but those are my feelings on it, and I genuinely mean it. I love what I do, and I hope that you have the same passion for it that I do. All right, thanks for watching. Bye bye.